Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in our 80th episode, we will be reviewing the 5th series of gritty BBC detective show Luther, starring Idris Elba. And then asking, is Luther our generation's Poirot? If that question didn't make any sense, we'll explain it later. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yep, the other recent cultural thing I've absorbed. I watched/played Bandersnatch, the latest episode of Black Mirror from Netflix, that is also a choose-your-own-adventure game, in which a young programmer called Stefan is working on his own sort of role-playing-y choose-your-own-adventure game, and finds himself stuck into a strange web of psychosis when he starts looking into the author of the book he's adapting for this game, who it turns out had some kind of breakdown. Yeah, it's weird. I enjoyed it. I went into it thinking, can this sort of choose-your-own-adventure thing work with a sort of serious, properly immersive story? And I came out of it thinking, I still don't really know, because Bandersnatch is basically written with a bit of a knowing, gimmicky wink to the viewer. You know, lol, we're doing lots of choose-your-own-adventure jokes in our choose-your-own-adventure game. It doesn't really try to achieve full dramatic immersion, which I think does actually mean it works quite well, because the sort of slight gimmickiness becomes part of the experience. So it works quite well in itself, but I don't know if it served as, you know, an amazing demo of how the technology is going to become widespread. At this point, I would still be slightly wary of if Choose Your Own Adventure becomes the new hotness and starts appearing everywhere.
I watched / played this as well, and I did find it really interesting. I don't really see this becoming like really popular. I mean, I don't want to say it was like a novelty, but I think the Choose Your Own Adventure structure kind of worked with the story that they wanted to tell. I don't really see how it would work with like many other stories without it seeming like a gimmick. I mean, here they clearly had something to say about, I don't know, meta-narratives or something like that. You know, the idea that, you know, someone's making a Choose-Your-Own-Adventure game based on a Choose-Your-Own-Adventure book, and you're sort of playing a Choose-Your-Own-Adventure game. I mean, there's even some quite self-aware bits when you can reveal to Stefan that you're controlling him on something called Netflix from the future. Which is, yeah, it's quite postmodern, quite self-aware. But, I mean, it all works. Like I say, partly because it's done with like a knowing wink, and partly because it's something that works with the story they're trying to tell. But I don't necessarily see this being like, you know, applied to a Marvel film or something like that. I don't really think that would work.
No, I mean, it works quite well with the Black Mirror fans, because obviously this idea of new technology driving someone mad is very much in their wheelhouse.
Yeah.
It worries me that the one thing with Choose Your Own Adventure technology is it is a rare example of a storytelling approach in media that is genuinely quite hard to pirate. Like, I imagine just burning this onto a DVD or sticking it on a torrent so anyone can download it. I'm sure the pirates would find a way, because they always do, but much like 3D, it probably wouldn't be completely straightforward. So I hope we're not going to see an ocean of this stuff just because it's quite hard to pirate.
Yeah, no, I guess not. But I was curious to see how much do people pirate as much as they used to, because Netflix isn't that expensive and gives you all the entertainment you could ever possibly want. I don't know, has that meant there's been a reduction in piracy?
There's certainly been a reduction in piracy among people I know who are roughly the same age as me, but yeah. I would be interested, yes, if there's any data on whether the piracy has actually decreased among younger people who were the age that I was when I did perhaps pirate a bit more stuff.
Yeah.
As a Black Mirror fan, or at least a long-running Black Mirror / Charlie Brooker appreciator, I do occasionally kind of miss the days when Black Mirror felt like him sort of dicking around in a slightly self-aware way. I feel like since it went to Netflix, he's felt, or perhaps been asked by Netflix, I don't know, for whatever reason, he has written these slightly more sincere dramas. So the return of this air of him knowingly dicking around, I did kind of enjoy.
Yeah, and it's set in like the sort of the 1980s with you know, and the video game that's been made is a sort of 8-bit video game, and it's clearly like a sort of love letter to that kind of 80s video game culture that Charlie Brooker was like immersed in, and it's, you know, there's loads of, I don't know, it's just an interesting time to set something, such a sort of the early, very creative stages of the video game industry. I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, clearly kind of, you know, Charlie Brooker has a lot of affection for 80s culture, so going back to that was clearly something that was important to him.
Well, yeah, and although he's done a lot of Black Mirror, he hasn't done that many episodes which really explicitly deal with, like, video games. And to be honest, the one he did do was that one with that sort of VR spider thing, which was actually kind of rubbish. So, yeah, I did think this worked a bit better as a sort of more literal love letter to video games.
Yeah.
As I say, I don't know if this has done much for me as a show reel for Choose Your Own Adventure technology as a whole, but as an episode of Black Mirror, it actually works quite well.
I thought it was an interesting experiment. It was nice to see them do something different, but I think I don't see this being like this taking off. Maybe I'll be forced to eat these words when in 5 years' time you can't move for Choose Your Own Adventure TV shows. But I don't really see this having wide scale application.
No, probably not. Anyway, so that's what I and also you have been doing. What else have you been doing?
I went to see a film, lots of surprise there, I'm sure, called The Favourite, starring Olivia Colman, Rachel Weisz, and Emma Stone. It's a film that's been getting quite a lot of buzz. I think Olivia Colman won a Best Actress Golden Globe. Yeah, and it's been getting a lot of good buzz on Twitter, a lot of good critical response. It's a really good film. It's funny, it's quite dark at places, it's got some very interesting, well-developed characters. It's set during the reign of Queen Anne, the beginning of the 18th century, which is not a period actually that gets covered a lot in historical adaptations. We get a lot of like Tudor stuff, and we get a lot of Victorian stuff. Yeah, and sometimes you get some like Civil War stuff, but we don't seem to get a lot of this period, which was interesting. And it's mainly about the sort of rivalry between two women to be the sort of favourite of the Queen, and thus bestowed with, favours and wealth and power to a degree. But yeah, it's also a quite sort of dark comedy. It is one of those sort of hyped up, quite sort of buzzed about award films, but actually I would recommend it as very good, and I think people should go see it.
Yeah, I must admit I haven't thought many of the sort of big Oscar contender films this year, except Black Panther obviously, have necessarily called out to me that much, but this one, because people have been talking about it as a kind of dark comedy, I was kind of interested in checking it out.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what does well for the Oscars this year. I guess we're waiting for the nominations to drop, and then it's always slightly unusual in the UK because there's always some films that get a lot of Oscar nominations that haven't been released in the UK yet. So it's a bit kind of like, what's that? And then you're like, and then you see it and you're like, oh, actually that's quite good. Or sometimes you think like it just seems like completely overhyped. There's a film called Green Book that I don't really know much about that comes out later this month. I think that's quite tipped as well. There's Vice as well, the film about Dick Cheney. I think Christian Bale won a Golden Globe for playing Dick Cheney in that. And so those are, some other possible Oscar buzz films. We may return to the subject of the Oscars nearer the time. But I saw a great tweet, and I can't remember who it was from, which is a shame, but they said basically, go see The Favourite because it's good, and you should see it before the inevitable kind of, it's overhyped backlash begins, as for everything that becomes successful and popular eventually gets the kind of, it's overhyped, isn't it? So yeah, I recommend go seeing it before the inevitable backlash, because no one can really enjoy anything anymore.
Okay, and now for today's main review feature, we are talking about the most recent series of Luther, which aired on the first 4 days of 2019 on the BBC, and stars Idris Elba as the scowling, trenchcoat-wearing detective who investigates a string of usually pretty grisly and unsettling murders, whilst engaging in a never-ending will they won't they with a quipping serial killer Alice, played by Ruth Wilson. This is the 5th series. The 4th series, of course, was a few years ago. Basically, now that Idris Elba is a comparatively big name in Hollywood and stuff, he still seems to like doing Luther, so it just comes out on in these sort of sporadic bursts whenever he has time. And yep, it's been a few years since series 4, which of course didn't have Alice in it because she was off doing American stuff. But they're both back for this 5th season, in which we see both the reunion of Luther and Alice, and also sees Luther investigating a series of serial killings by a mysterious man in a hoodie. So, Luther is one of Alastair's favourite shows, so let's see what he thought about it.
Well, it won't surprise anyone that I did like this series, because I'm a big fan of Luther. As you say, it's one of my favourite shows. So I was just pleased to have more Luther. Every time they make a series, I always think that, this has got to be the last one, because Idris Elba is just too famous to come back and do more of a sort of, a BBC detective show. But he keeps coming back, and so I'm always really pleased when they do new series. And it's because Idris Elba is great in the role. The performance is absolutely excellent. He always does a great job. The character is really watchable, interesting, psychologically complex. Luther seems like a real three-dimensional person, which is why he's so watchable. And the show is always very tense and quite gritty, especially, the murders are particularly usually quite nasty and quite viscerally done in terms of how they're realised on television. So it's tense, it's scary, it's quite disturbing. So and this series had all the classic Luther elements. Especially, I thought the serial killer plot was very good this year. It was quite grim, and it had some good twists along the way. And it seemed generally quite tense and menacing at times. I kind of felt that that's the plot I enjoyed the most. The other plots involving Alice and Luther, his non-kind of crime-solving life, I mean, they were interesting, but I kind of felt there was quite a lot of that in this season, and it sort of got in the way of Luther solving crimes, which is what I'm most interested in. I felt a little bit like, the kind of last series of Sherlock, when there was too much meta stuff, not enough basic solving cases. It wasn't quite as bad as the last series of Sherlock for that, but I do feel that more of kind of, Luther trying to solve the case of this serial killer stalking London is kind of what I signed up for, and maybe a bit less of the kind of the Alice plotline.
Yeah, I am going to go ahead and agree with you for the most part here, so this is not going to be one of our more combative episodes. Although I think I was slightly more annoyed by the extent to which the Alice storyline took away from the crime stuff that I was quite enjoying, especially because they'd cast the great Hermione Norris as one of the main characters in the crime storyline. She was the serial killing dude's wife, and I liked her in Spooks, I liked her in Cold Feet, I always like her when she turns up, and I felt she didn't really get particularly well served because they clearly lost interest in her character. It's somewhere in the middle of the second episode. So there were 4 episodes of this, and it was basically a slow journey from them starting off entirely covering this crime, and by about episode 3, they basically were ignoring the crime entirely in favour of the Alice storyline. I mentioned episode 3 because that is about when I started to get a bit... This is starting to actually feel like a bit of a slog in a way. Can we get back to the crime now? Thankfully, in episode 4, they did balance things off a bit better. Plus, it was the final episode, so there had to be some chasing and some shooting, and I was, kept a bit more suitably entertained. But yeah, I felt that the Alice storyline, entirely as you said, did get a bit recent series of Sherlock, in that it's a level of let's talk about the fundamental relationships of the show in a punishing level of detail, and I don't know, it felt a bit like the writers were dealing with the eternal battle of this character is quite popular. Should their level of popularity be equal to their level of screen time? To which the answer is nearly always no. Those sort of characters do a lot better with a lot less screen time. Also, I swear Alice used to be more fun. I've seen all of Luther, and, I know why people like Alice. It's because Alice is charismatic and funny and cool and gently menacing and enigmatic and generally good on screen. And it didn't really seem like she was most of that for most of this series. I don't remember enjoying watching Ruth Wilson play Alice that much, which, to be honest, might be one reason why I came away finding her storyline a bit of a drag.
Yeah, I mean, that is the appeal of the character of Alice. I guess she's sort of a sociopathic murderer and is unashamed about it. It's possible, I think, that maybe they spun out the character a bit too long, in that in the first series, she was interesting because she committed the perfect murder of killing her parents and getting away with it. And Luther had this sort of cat and mouse thing with her that he was trying to catch her. And then it was interesting how in the sort of the second and third series, she popped up occasionally, usually to get him out of a scrape. But at this point, she was just kind of, I don't know, the character kind of gone beyond the end of her life cycle, and I think when that happens with characters a lot, they become sort of cartoon versions of themselves sometimes. Like, she basically was sort of cartoonishly sociopathic and cartoonishly violent, in that she was just kind of killing people left, right and centre. I know, for example, there's a bit when she wants to take a hit on this crime boss who's menacing Luther and herself, and she just kind of shows up his house with a massive machine gun and just starts gunning down the entire house. And it's a bit like, where did she get that from? Is she just now, when you get to a certain level of sociopathy, can you just summon weapons out of the air?
Yeah, I know Luther is not necessarily the most grounded of crime shows, but that did seem a bit of a leap from their usual level of, oh dear, someone's chopped up this body, to, oh dear, she's got a massive fucking minigun.
Yeah, but, I mean, that's kind of... I think it's partly because there was just like a bit too much of this kind of plot line that's when it kind of descended into ridiculousness. What I liked about, especially the second and third series, was that they had 4 episodes and there were 2 cases that Luther would solve each series, each one being a 2-parter with like a twist in the middle. It's a kind of standard BBC detective format, I think. I mean, they've used it before in lots of shows. I think Touch of Frost was usually like that. You kind of, your case would run over 2 episodes, so you could have like a big twist in the middle and then it wouldn't drag on too long. But in this one, they had 1 case over 4 episodes, which meant there was a lot more time for there to be Alice stuff, which I kind of, like I say, felt they probably had too much Alice stuff, whereas had they done 2 cases and they reduced the Alice stuff probably back down to the level that it needed, that would have probably been a bit more entertaining. Like I say, it wouldn't have dragged so much in episode 3. Like, the serial killer plot, they dropped the big twist at the end of episode 1. From this point on, there might be spoilers for people who've not seen this. That they dropped the big twist at the end of episode 1, which is that the person they're hunting, they think is this kind of hooded serial killer, is actually not the person who, it was someone who was framed by the real serial killer. That's a good twist. And then they reveal that, like, it's the husband of the woman who did the framing. it's a good twist, and I thought like, oh, right, excellent. So that's like kind of the twist at the halfway point. So in the second episode, you see the ramifications as, Luther discovers that he's been tricked and then ultimately catches the killer. And then, in the third and fourth episode, there could be a new case, but they didn't do that. They kept kind of spinning out the serial killer plot over a longer time, which I felt didn't really work as well.
Probably, yeah. The first episode, they did have about one episode worth of developments in that serial killer plot. And then in the second, third, and fourth episode, they also had about one episode worth of development between them, which, yeah, as you say, it might have been better if they just wrapped that up in episode 2, then either given us a new storyline, or possibly just done episode 3 and 4 as a two-parter about Alice if they really had to. I'd rather they didn't, but they could have just done that. Part of me occasionally thinks that, to be honest, this show had a perfectly good ending at the end of Series 3, when it kind of felt like they were trying to wrap it up, just in case Idris Elba never came back. And then when it turns out Idris Elba did want to come back, they had to kind of awkwardly shuffle it back from the dead. I mean, it's a crime show. The main gimmick is there's this detective played by this charismatic actor, and he's here to work out who chopped up that body. And you can basically drag that out interminably, and there's no real reason not to. And to be honest, the more they try to address this Alice stuff, the more awkward it gets, but they clearly resolved that already.
Yeah.
Since we're doing full spoilers, and again, I'm going to literally spoil the last 5 minutes of the episode here, so last chance to run. They do seem to have resolved the Alice stuff pretty finely now. I'll give them this. The one reason they seem to have gone quite hard on the Alice in Series 5 is because Alice looks pretty dead at the end. If we must have a big overdose of Alice now, at least it looks like we probably won't be getting much more of her.
Yeah, I think they definitely wrapped up that plot line. Like you say, Luther, it did sometimes feel like it came to the end in Series 3. I thought they wouldn't do another series after Series 2 because Idris Elba was pretty famous at that point. He'd been in Thor and he'd been in that film of the life of Nelson Mandela and things like that. And then when he came back to do the third series, I thought he's clearly attached to the character. I guess they want to do an epic trilogy. And then, when he takes off the trench coat and throws it in the Thames at the end of Series 3, that did feel like the symbolic hanging up of the spurs for the character. And I thought, well, that's a good ending. Yeah, then they brought him back for the sort of a brief two-parter Series 4, where they, again, compressed one case and some Alice stuff into 2 episodes, and it also seemed a bit rushed. I'm glad that we got more episodes this time. They certainly wrapped up the Alice plot. I mean, to a degree, there could be... This is also a point they could leave the entire of Luther. I guess the thing about Luther is with every series, they need to leave it at a point where it could just be left, because, again, Idris Elba might be too famous to come back. But yeah, they killed off quite a lot of characters. They killed off Alice. They killed off Benny, which was really quite sad. I liked Benny, Luther's sort of techie assistant, played by Michael Smiley, who I always think of as Tyres from Spaced. And generally he does mainly comedic performances, but actually seeing him doing dramatic acting here, he's very, very good, Michael Smiley. Yeah, so when they killed off Benny, I was generally like, what? You can't kill Benny? He's one of the people who's good, and he's not done anything wrong. Why does he get murdered?
Doesn't everyone Luther loves die? Don't they basically kill off one mostly undeserving person from Luther's personal life per series?
Pretty much, yeah. His wife dies in the first series. His partner dies in the third series.
Yeah. Okay, every other series they kill off an undeserving person from Luther's personal life. The trick is to make friends of Luther in an even-numbered series.
And that's it. But in this one, there was a pretty big bloodbath. They brought back Paul McGann and also nearly killed off his character, which was good. They killed off the new partner, D.S. Catherine Halloway.
I did like that moment, actually, to be fair. Possibly mostly because I've been finding it occasionally a bit of a trudge. I did quite like the moment where they really suddenly killed off that character in a sort of, someone just sniped her from off camera, and I sort of jumped up in my seat and went, holy fuck. Fair enough, I've been waiting for this programme to jerk me out of my post-Christmas food coma for a while now.
Yeah, that was a surprising twist, and it was very well handled. That was just kind of the big twist before the final showdown between Luther and Alice.
Yeah, it seems to be a big part of them trying to walk back this whole Alice and Luther's relationship is something you can get behind thing, There seems to be a big sort of, remember lads, she's actually a serial killer. In some ways, leaving your job as a policeman and running away with a serial killer is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Let's try and remember that by having the serial killer kill a bunch of people in a slightly unhinged fashion before dying herself.
Yeah. What I really liked about this series is there was, I felt like, a strong sense of escalating tension throughout, which kind of, really did build to a head in the bit you just said. Like, in the final few minutes when Alice kills Luther's partner, then Luther tries to finally realise that he's going to arrest her for the huge numbers of murders she's committed. And
it's good, but that's finally occurred to him.
Yeah, and then obviously they have a fight because she doesn't want to be arrested. And then she slightly Reichenbacher Falls-esque, falls to her death from a scaffolding in a construction site. Yeah, that was kind of a good payoff over what was an increasing level of tension throughout the show.
Strongly disagree. I spent most of the third episode quite bored.
Yeah, I suppose, there was I suppose it was slow at times. I mean, like in the final episode, there was a sense of...
Yes, in the final episode, they did at least manage to get a bit of tension going on, but no, I felt that, not to harp on it, but the third episode did suffer particularly badly from a distinct lack of strong rising tension.
Yeah, but by the end, I felt there was a sense, that like you could really see everything was coming to a head. Like Luther's life was falling apart. His boss had turned on him, especially by the point when they find Benny dead. The boss was clearly like, Luther's a brilliant cop and a bit of a loose cannon, but this has got totally out of hand. Now there are dead policemen showing up.
I think what slightly got, although it did get a bit more exciting in the fourth episode, I felt like they were trying to make some sort of point about what a dangerous man Luther is, and I kept... Yeah, I don't know. It seemed to be getting quite confusing. I mean, we meant to be finally thinking, okay, Luther, you're actually a bad person here, or is it just... I don't know. It just seemed a bit strange.
Yeah. Are you supposed to sympathise with Luther? Are you supposed to think that he's basically a good guy who's just got dragged into, over his head by Alice's madness? Or is it Luther's fault, the fact that he gets sucked up in these things and then people he cares about inevitably get hurt? I guess that's kind of the moral ambiguity of the show. I don't know if you're supposed to have an answer to that.
No. Also, when Benny died, there's this bit where he dies and he heroically shouts out a load of descriptions into the phone before he dies.
Of the person who's about to kill him.
Did that go anywhere? Did that description actually achieve anything? Did Luther find the person based on that description? He didn't, did he?
No, he didn't.
So he killed himself for nothing?
No, well, I guess he died to save the Paul McGann character, who wasn't, I guess, a cop or involved in Luther, because the hitman hired by George, the gang boss, was going to kill the Paul McGann character to get to Luther, and I guess Benny sacrificed himself. So I guess he didn't die for nothing. He died to save Paul McGann, who, I don't know, in the grand hierarchy of Luther characters, might be considered more innocent. But other than that, it didn't achieve much.
I had to Google who Mark was, but I felt like they could have phoned me a few lines of exposition.
He was in the first series.
I watched that about 7 years ago.
Yeah.
I felt like they could have given me a few lines to remind me that he's Luther's ex-wife's new boyfriend.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, that's what I eventually worked out from Google.
Yeah. I mean, it's partly because I thought, like, this might be, again, the end for Luther, in that they brought back some of the few surviving characters from previous series, such as, Paul McGann as Mark. Yeah, and obviously bringing back Alice, who wasn't in the fourth series. Maybe that was one they were trying to, I don't know, bring back some of the favourite faces for a finale. I mean, because this is the sort of show when almost any character can be killed, I guess, apart from Luther, there was a real sense of tension when you're like, God, how many of Luther's friends and companions are going to die? Possibly all of them.
If anything, I think it at least might serve as a bit of a reset, Maybe we're finally free of the ending of Series 3, and we can now just move forward with Luther as a policeman solving crimes.
Yeah, although he gets arrested by his boss and dragged away in handcuffs at the end, so they might have to do a bit of like what they did at Series 4, which is Luther is clearly not a cop anymore. They need a reason why the Force would bring him back. Because one of the things I do like about the show is that even though Luther is a loose cannon and does lots of crazy, stupid stuff, there is a sense that there are consequences to this. Like in the third series, he's under an internal affairs investigation because you can't, I guess, kill this many people and do this many crazy things without the police being like, is this guy a good cop or is he just a crazy person? And yeah, by the end of Series 5, there was a fact that the amount of time Luther had spent aiding gangland bosses to save his serial killer girlfriend while another serial killer was on the loose and he wasn't doing much to track him down. That did seem to come back to bite him in the arse in the end when he got arrested in the final few minutes and dragged off in handcuffs. So there is a sense of consequences for Luther's loose cannon behaviour. But I guess if they do a 6th series, although it'll be a nice reset, there's no Alice, there's almost all the supporting cast are gone. They were going to have to come up with some reason for him to go back to being a cop, or why the police would bring him back after what happened.
But as you say, I'm sure they'll just deal with it in the first 10 minutes, then we can move on with the murder.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, despite all the minor complaining I've done, I still enjoy Idris Elba playing this part, and I still have an interest in seeing him solve a bloody crime. And I did enjoy the crime storyline in this, I just wish there had been more of it.
Yeah. The key to the show is how good Idris Elba is at playing Luther. It's an amazing performance, and he's just very watchable. So, and like the sort of aesthetic they've got going on, the sort of very grim and gritty, awful serial killer murders in London. And the kind of the darkness of the characters suits the kind of darkness of the tone of the show and the darkness of the murderers. That's what works. And I'm completely convinced they could do a 6th series and it would be entertaining. As long as they get Idris Elba back and they could get that tone, then yeah, the 6th series probably would be good if, like I say, Idris Elba isn't too famous to come back.
I mean, as you say, he seems to like it. He seems to want to keep doing it, so there may well be more in a few years when this returns for Luther's Sunny Funny Christmas Special 2022 or something. Okay, and Going off that Christmas special remark, it's time for this fortnight's related question. Is Luther this generation's Poirot? This, of course, refers to his apparent nature as a detective who just returns every few years to investigate another couple of crimes, often for like a seasonal special or something. Some shows have a beginning, middle and end. They tell their story, get out and never come back. Others, especially in Britain it seems, become these kind of recurring features that just come back onto the screen every few years, dragged out of retirement to see what they've been up to and do some more comedy antics or do another crime. Only Fools for the Horses may not mean much to our American listeners, but it's very much a key element in this particular subgenre of eternal Christmas perennials. So, Alastair, you're a big Luther fan. Is Luther this generation's Poirot, and should it be?
I think it is. Partly for the obvious reasons, which is that it has a high-profile actor in the main role. They do a special every few Christmases or so. Well, that's the kind of the rhythm they seem to have set into after Series 3. And there's always lots of build-up and hype around it as a kind of one of the big events of Christmas/New Year telly. Like this year, Luther was being advertised on the side of buses in London. It's clearly a big deal. And weirdly, I think partly because it fits into the kind of the format of the Poirot Christmas specials. And that is because there's actually something comforting and familiar about Luther, which is odd because the subject matter and the show generally is very, very dark. But even so, I find a sort of like a warm comfort in Luther because I like it so much, and it's just the sense of having something to look forward to, something that you're pretty sure will be good and entertaining over Christmas. So yeah, you need that kind of that sense of a Christmas TV event to look forward to that's going to be good. And for some reason in Britain, we really like our sadistic murders. Luther can fill that void that Poirot left because they're not making it anymore.
See, I feel like Luther, I don't know, I mean, I was going to say that the grimness kind of rules it out, but then again, there are plenty of British crime shows that have existed for a long time and been strangely mainstream despite how depressingly grim they are and how much they are just about the detective sitting alone in a room feeling sad about the crushing nature of the world, like Cracker and Prime Suspect. And full disclosure, I've never actually watched A Touch of Frost. I suspect that was not quite as crushingly depressing.
Certainly not as depressing as Luther, or probably even say as grim as like Cracker. But I guess it was, for its age, it probably was a bit darker than Midsummer Murders or Miss Marple, or something like that. Or maybe even Poirot itself. Like, it was less of a drawing room murder and more of a human being has had their life rendered from them by acts of violence, kind of actually engaging with that to some degree. But no, it is not as dark as Luther.
I mean, obviously, what we're saying in the extent is it has this generation normalised a certain degree of grimness and swearing and violence to the extent that things like Luther are now the big, every year, mainstream perennials.
Well, yeah, I think is the answer. Yes, we have.
I don't know, I still haven't entirely worked out if Luther actually is, a massive mainstream audience family favourite, or if it is just still a more of a specialist treat for people like us who enjoy Idris Elba from The Wire or whatever.
I don't know, I guess it must be popular enough to warrant a bus-based advertising campaign. I guess that's not really something that's done for cult classics. It was clearly a big part of the BBC's Christmas lineup this year. But maybe that's partly because Idris Elba is so famous that they really want to sell the fact that they've got a really high-profile actor in a Christmas TV event.
I mean, wasn't it last year the exact same slot as Luther, the sort of starting on the New Year slot was when they did the fourth series of Sherlock?
Yeah, Sherlock is probably what filled the gap after they stopped doing Poirot a few years ago. Around the year again, doing the Christmas specials, with David Suchet.
We really mean New Year specials, don't we? That seems to be where they put this sort of thing.
Yeah, over the kind of Christmas, New Year sort of period, you usually get the Christmas Day stuff is obviously usually where you get your EastEnders on Christmas Day. And obviously it's something like Doctor Who that's usually a bit more aimed at the family. And then New Year's Day is a kind of a good one for the premium drama. But after the kind of the reign of Poirot came to an end, it seemed to be Sherlock filled the gap. But again, that has kind of come to an end partly due to the stars of the show probably becoming too famous to make it anymore, and also the fact that the show just went to crap.
Yeah, I'm curious whether Sherlock will eventually settle into a similar rhythm of every 4 to 5 years they do another couple of episodes, just because Cumberbatch and Freeman and Moffat feel like it. And I'm sure that could happen, to be honest, if they just do a mystery and don't, similar to what I'm saying about Luther now, to be honest. I would also be more interested in watching Sherlock if they did just do a damn mystery and didn't just disappear up their mythological bumhole.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if Cumberbatch did spray out another Sherlock every few years, I could probably live with that, to be honest. I imagine I'd watch it.
Yeah, I mean, that's another possibility. I get the sense that they kind of did firmly draw a line under Sherlock with the last series, partly because I think almost everyone was getting annoyed with how, to the degree it had disappeared up its own bumhole and become completely obsessed with the mythology of Sherlock rather than, having actual cases. I mean, I guess the thing about Luther is it is kind of based around Idris Elba's schedule. Even though he's very much in demand, being very successful, I guess they only have to coordinate it around one megastar, whereas both Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman are very successful. So trying to find a time when both of their schedules will allow them, when they're not both filming Marvel stuff, probably is more difficult. But then again, I wouldn't, as you say, if they did another Sherlock thing, I would probably watch it with a sense of trepidation. It'd be nice if they just guaranteed, look, we're just going to do a regular mystery, kind of like we did for the Hounds of the Baskervilles.
Yeah. What other shows are going to disappear off into sort of every so often perennial? It's basically crime shows and sitcoms, isn't it?
Yeah, there is this British, I guess, weird obsession we have with grisly murders being kind of relaxing entertainment. I mean, the most obvious example is Midsummer Murders, there's also Death in Paradise, when actually the show is actually quite nice and gentle and really relaxing, other than the fact that, as I say, the basic premise of the show is a human being, a living, breathing individual, has had their life prematurely brought to an end by an act of violence, which actually is like the worst possible thing that could ever happen to someone. But this is apparently in Britain the basis for light entertainment.
I mean, I guess in America they do have things like, I don't know, Diagnosis Murder or whatever, which are kind of comfy daytime viewing about murder. So it's not just us who are weirdly blasé about death.
There seems to be something British about it, like this is what we base our post-Christmas celebration around. But yeah, maybe because it echoes back to, like, say, Agatha Christie, creator of Poirot and Miss Marple and others. She is like one of our national writers, and murder mysteries are so ingrained into our culture from that. And yeah, Poirot was such an institution at the BBC, and certainly for people of my parents' generation, it was like essential Christmas viewing. In terms of other things that might fill the void, Luther, Sherlock, although I haven't seen it, a lot of people talked a lot about Rowan Atkinson playing Marguerite in adaptation of those novels. I think that was pitched much more at, say, my parents than my generation. I think clearly that was trying to find something that directly fills the void left by Poirot. And also Rowan Atkinson, I guess, casting around for an iconic character that, isn't either Blackadder or Mr. Bean, because he seems to, I guess, have hung up both of those characters.
Also, they did bring back Poirot himself over Christmas in the ABC Murders, although in what I gather was a sort of darker version, although I haven't seen it, so... Yeah,
I think they kind of Lutherized it a bit. It wasn't with David Suchet or supposed to be a continuation of the previous series of adaptations, which they did, like I say, firmly draw a line under.
No, it was John Malkovich.
No, John Malkovich, yeah. Yeah, there just seems to be like a sort of rotating cast of detective specials. I guess, one gets done each year. Like I say, maybe, there's Luther this year, possibly a Marguerite. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Next year, maybe there'll be Sherlock year after that. And like I say, maybe in like 2022, Luther will come back for Series 6.
I do occasionally think, I have also seen people theorise this on Twitter, to be fair, so I'm not entirely claiming this is my brilliant, unique idea. But Doctor Who might eventually go this way, when there finally does no longer seem to be appetite for another 12, 13 episodes every year, or every couple of years, as seems to currently be happening.
Yeah, I guess Doctor Who is also very expensive, so that would allow them to make it cheaper if they only did like 3 episodes every 4 years rather than 12 episodes every year. I think that's partly one of the reasons why the BBC likes these, is they probably spend, like I say, as much money as like half a series of Doctor Who on like a 2-hour special. But obviously the BBC doesn't have huge amounts of money, but they can make something that looks really, really good over Christmas. It's a big event, and it feels like, I guess, a way to spend money. Like last year they did, I mean, this isn't a murder mystery, but it did have a mystery in it, was that adaptation of The Miniaturist. That was absolutely beautiful to look at, a wonderful rendering of sort of the golden age of the Netherlands. Yeah, like I say, it probably costs quite a lot of money, but again, if they do it over Christmas, it's like a big Christmas event. Which seems like an effective way to spend the money, where I guess Doctor Who does consume a lot of money to fill 10 episodes in the middle of the summer. I don't know, is that considered as a good way to spend their money?
Well, of course, Doctor Who, since it came back, has given them a Christmas special as well.
Yeah.
I mean, they have done a few breaks where they've broken Doctor Who back to specials, I guess, partly trying to give the team a rest and partly trying to maybe build up a bit more of a sense of event around it.
Yeah.
It does perhaps feel like Doctor Who just becoming sort of a standard routine thing that just happens every year rather than a special event has meant it's kind of just faded into the background a bit, and people who aren't fans are just able to go, okay, whatever, Doctor Who's back on.
Yeah, I guess there is a sense that it's not quite the attention draw it was maybe especially I guess under the Matt Smith years when Doctor Who seemed to break America, and it did seem to be quite a big deal. Although people in my Twitter feed and sort of people like similar to me did have really liked Jodie Whittaker, there is in the sense that it's got the kind of mainstream success success that it had under the Matt Smith years. So I don't know if that means Doctor Who is waning, its star is waning. But then again, isn't there something about like this series was the most watched one in a while?
I think the ratings have actually gone up. I still think it was okay at best, but the ratings seem to go up, so whatever.
Yeah, I don't wonder how popular it is in America. I think the success of Doctor Who in America is kind of what continued to mean the BBC could spend vast amounts of money on it, because it was actually an international brand rather than just something for British viewers.
But anyway, yeah, I can imagine Doctor Who becoming more of an event special one day, was my point, at some stage down the line, if it does go a bit more onto the wane. Or if they get a lead actor who is so massive they can only get them for a few episodes every couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what other dramas or sitcoms might one day just become occasional specials. It seems to be happening to Outnumbered, which is a show I have enjoyed in the past, which was fun, if only because that was built so heavily around these young kids and they started, really visibly going through puberty. But they seem to have trailed off that, or at least they haven't done one for a few years.
Yeah, there's usually like a sitcom they'll bring back for Christmas and like that. Or didn't they resurrect Cold Feet a few years ago? Although that might not have been at Christmas.
Cold Feet, they did what they often seem to do with American shows when they bring them back, which was rather than just making a couple of specials, they just made another series and it just became a going concern again. Cold Feet came back for another series and I watched it because I have vaguely fond memories of that show and it was quite fun, although, yeah, I haven't bothered watching Series 7. I gather they're now doing Series 8, which still seems strange to me, but whatever. Yeah, Cold Feet does seem to have had a full revival, much like Will and Grace in America, which is apparently now going up again as a regular sitcom.
Yeah.
And of course Roseanne, which went pretty well.
Yeah, we all know how that ended, yeah. But that's partly because of this kind of nostalgia culture means we were like kind of reaching for anything to bring back, because older things need to have some kudos. Like, I'm pretty sure they would have resurrected The Cosby Show by this point if it hadn't been for all of the sexual abuse allegations against Bill Cosby.
But yeah, we talk a lot about how nostalgia culture is big nowadays, but obviously we've been, as we discussed over the last 10-15 minutes, we've been resurrecting old stuff and shoving its corpse out in front of an audience for a while now. That's quite an incompetent resurrection we've just done, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only difference seems to be now we're doing it on a much bigger scale and like all the time instead of just for a handful of properties at Christmas.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know, maybe this BBC Christmas special thing kind of set the template for this, and like the idea that that thing you liked in the past, well, it's back for a Christmas special.
Idris Elba is back. He's 75. He's still wearing the coat, although it hangs off him in a sort of unsettling skeletal way now.
Yeah. You never know. I mean, they kept making Poirot for years and years and years. So obviously with just a few episodes every Christmas. So it is the sort of thing that Luther could become, so long as Idris Elba still wants to do it.
I mean, I probably would keep watching that out of morbid curiosity, but as a part of me that doesn't entirely love the idea.
Yeah.
Cool. So have we reached the sad answer to the question, is Luther this generation's Poirot? Maybe.
Yeah.
Hopefully not, but maybe.
I mean, certainly it's got all the elements of things our generation likes, such as, well, it's become premium TV partly because of the degree to which Idris Elba has his star has ascended. I mean, it's gritty and amoral. It has no sense of fair play. It has the whole thing, you can't trust institutions for the police to look out for you. Nothing ever gets any better. Things usually get worse. The best you can hope for Luther is a return to base level normality. It's pretty unrelenting and unpleasant. There's something about that all does appeal to, I know, people of my age as our temperament and outlook on life, just as I guess the rather polite drawing room murders of Poirot appealed to my parents' generation. So make of that what you will.
Great. I feel an editorial coming on how millennials turn Christmas into an abattoir.
Thanks for listening. That's all we have time for this episode. But before we go, I have a brief apology to make. In the previous episode, Nick and I listed our top 5 films and TVs from 2018, and I realised that there's one show that I completely overlooked because it came out right at the beginning of 2018, and that was Derry Girls. And I did really like that show, and I must apologise, say it probably really should have been in my top 5 TV shows of the year, probably knocking The Good Place off in position 5. So apologies to fans of Derry Girls. I literally forgot it because it was right back at the beginning of 2018, but that was an excellent show. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you have, then please subscribe so that you never miss an episode. If you've already subscribed, then please leave us a review in your podcatcher of choice, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find other episodes of this podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And you can also follow us on social media at MFV Podcast on Twitter or by searching Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook, where you can hear our occasional thoughts on the latest culture-related developments, and apologies for the, 1 or 2 times we've run late. So get on board with that now. And you can also follow me on Twitter as @NickMB, where you can hear about my opinions on cultural developments mostly, and also my work on various novels and comics, including my new comic Moonframe, which is about astronauts in space encountering something bad, something very bad. It'll be out shortly after the next episode of this podcast, so I'm making a small effort to actually try and start talking about it now. It's nice sort of black and white spooky art by Lucas Peveril, and it'll be available in print and digital on my website. Thank you. Oh, and my website is nickbryan.com, if that wasn't obvious.
I've been Alastair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlastairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Thanks for listening. Join us in the next episode when we will be reviewing Glass, a new film from director M. Night Shyamalan, starring James McAvoy, Bruce Willis, and Samuel L. Jackson. Join us then. Goodbye.
Bye. I just have to clarify that I did remember Derry Girls, but intentionally did not put it on my top 10. It was very good, though.
Yes, because Nick is good at remembering 2018, whereas I failed.